I think it's really important that we recognize that there is something in between grammar and vocab, and we need to pay really close attention to that. It kind of sounds like I'm making up a problem giving you solutions, but it's a real problem. Think about the two English sentences, I want you to help me, and I noticed her speaking Spanish. One of them uses to an infinitive, one of them uses a gerund. In English grammar, they're about the same thing, so why did I use those forms for those verbs? Well, it's the topic of this video. It is that arbitrary thing in between grammar and vocab. If you make a mistake with this, natives hear a problem with your grammar. Just imagine if someone says, I want you helping me. To a native's ear, that's a grammar mistake. From the learner's perspective, that's a vocab problem because you learned want in some particular flashcard. Let me give some more examples of this. In French, we can say, Je me suis habitué à étudier tous les matins. I got used to studying every morning. The key point here is s'habituer à. Always when you use s'habituer, you always have to follow it with à in French. You just have to memorize it, it is arbitrary, and it's just connected to this s'habituer. In another French example, you'll say, J'ai décidé de voyager à Paris. Key point here is décider de. Always have to use de when you use décider. Totally arbitrary, and it's just about this verb, and you just have to memorize it. You might think, oh well, French and English are pretty similar languages, so maybe it's usually obvious which to use. No, no, no. The famous example is the French verb manquer. If you wanted to say I miss you, you're probably going to check in the dictionary manquer, and you'll incorrectly say je te manque. That is grammatically correct, but that's not what you wanted to say. Because in French, the subject is the thing that is absent, and the object is the person with the feeling of longing. So it's completely switched from English, right? We have the sad person misses the absent person. But in French, we have the absent person, manquer, the sad person. Totally arbitrary, but the dictionary would have led you astray if you had listened to it, right? Japanese and Korean are pretty similar languages, but if you always trust that one is going to tell you what to do in the other, you'll also get some things wrong. For example, in Korean, you can say 저는 10년 전에 의사가 됐어요. 10 years ago, I became a doctor. Key point here is 의사가. When you use 되다, you use a topic marker and a subject marker. In Japanese, you would say 私は10年前に医者になりました. So when you use become in Japanese, you need ni, which is the particle not for the subject, that's the particle for movement, for location and time, for direction. The equivalent in Japanese would be ga, and you don't use it here. So your knowledge of Korean would lead you astray. These connections to other languages are specific to the language and specific to the word. There is no way you can get around not memorizing these. Memorizing, that sounds very similar to vocab, right? You learn a new vocab, you learn a new pronunciation, you learn a new meaning. This third category is kind of like that, right? Unless it's some basic word like become, your grammar book's probably not going to mention this way words are connecting to other words. If you're using an AI dictionary like Google Translate, it's not going to mention the way things are connecting to other words. It's not going to mention décider de. It's not going to mention何かになる. I think of language learning kind of like a puzzle, and each word is kind of like the puzzle piece. You get a majority of that meaning from the center of that puzzle piece, right? When you look at it, you see, oh, it's this part of the puzzle, I'm going to put it there. But an extremely important part to know where it goes in the puzzle are those tabs and slots which tell you how it's going to connect to the piece next to it, or what kind of piece it accepts. So yes, you can make the puzzle by looking at the center of that puzzle piece, but it's not going to be very smooth, and you're probably going to make some mistakes along the way. Language learning is just like that. So dispel this idea that language learning and creating a sentence is just combining grammar and dictionary entries. It's a little bit more than that. If you think of it like that, you're missing a pretty important piece. Those connections between words that I mentioned before are usually pretty arbitrary, and they really need to be studied consciously just alongside the meaning and the pronunciation when you learn a new word. Just a quick reminder that if you've liked this video so far, please give it a like and subscribe if you want to see more from me. But back to what I was saying. So I just created a problem for you. What are the solutions? The obvious one is to include this in your vocab learning. This is one of the reasons that I prefer to use Anki and create cards for myself. I sometimes do use those apps that create cards for you, but I really prefer to make it my own in order to include these connections between words that the apps usually miss. Future Alex here, and I want to quickly show how I'm doing what I'm talking about. How do I include those extra words when I'm learning my vocab? Right here in the expression sakınca, do you mind if, you need to know how this connects to the other verbs. So I included that here with a bunch of parentheses because it can change quite a lot in Turkish. But when I'm looking at this Anki word, I will know instantly, I need to use this form, I need to have this ending, I need this ending, and it's instantly clear if I use it in another context. I am not a fan of memorizing sentences because when I memorize sentences and I need to use an example, I end up doing this anyways. I remove that other word and I create some formula. I derive the formula out of nothing. So if I already put it in this formula form, it saves me time. In the case of sabırsızlanmak, it's really important to know you need to use için with it, so I include it here in my Anki word. In the case of German, when you use entsprechen, you always need to use the dative case, and I include that here with my vocab word. So I remember every time I use entsprechen, I always have to use mir, dir, or whatever, dem, or whatever. French doesn't have quite as many choices for ways to connect to words, but in this Anki word, I remember I need prendre garde à, but then I need to faire preuve de. So it's included in my Anki word. I could just do faire preuve, but I really need to remember faire preuve de. Another thing you can do to address this problem is to create more complex sentences with more verbs, use adjective phrases more. You could make a simple sentence that say something like, I will not smoke. But here you encountered, the grammar point of the future tense, but you only used one vocab word, smoke. But you could say something like, I plan to stop smoking. Suddenly you have 3 vocab words, and you have 2 of those little puzzle piece connections. Plan to, and then quit smoking. Plan always needs to, and quit always needs ing. Instead of just saying subject is adjective, say subject is adjective, and then the necessary preposition. Not just I'm proud, how about I'm proud of you? Another solution, which is pretty obvious, is get lots and lots of native input. Lots of native input seems to be the solution to a lot of language learning problems, but again, for this, it's a major one. And that's because you can clearly see the native speaker recall what is the important connecting word to create a more complex sentence. So 1, an example. 2, you can see even if they connect those words. Maybe in your language, you will create some complex structure using that verb. Maybe in your target language, that's totally unnecessary. What comes to mind is in Korean, when you say want, you cannot just say want. You need verb and want. If you want something, you need to say you want to have something. So from the Korean perspective going into English, they'll be surprised when they hear us English speakers say, I want this, I want that. They're going to need to hear examples of us saying, I want food, I want water, I want milk.
I want mommy, I want milk, I want to be held, I want to be comforted.
So getting lots of native input will tell you how you should connect this word, even if you should connect it at all. My last tip for addressing this problem is something that is like a double-edged sword. My tip is to be conscious of how these words are connecting to other words when you hear a sentence. Do the very unnatural thing of parsing the sentence. Latin is a dead language, and in Latin class, my teacher had us parse the words a lot, so we would look at a sentence and really analyze what's happening here. Volo, first person, singular, present indicative. Mihi, first person, singular, dative. We analyzed the words as if it's like math or something. For this purpose, it's helpful with your language learning. You can really see how things are connecting. For example, I was communicating with my Turkish teacher recently, and they said something like, Ne düşündüğünü bilmek hoşuma gitti. And I really thought hard about this sentence. What is going on? Well, when you use bilmek, you need to use the dık form, changed for vowel harmony. So that's how we get düşündüğünü. But then there's the interesting expression hoşuma gitmek, like. But the thing that we like is actually the subject in Turkish. And you can clearly see that by bilmek. That's obviously the subject. So when I analyzed this sentence and really saw what was the object, what was the subject, what's connecting to what, I was able to understand that. I knew all of those words before my teacher sent that to me, but really thinking about it, I understood how things were connecting. When I use bilmek, what sort of other particles do I need? When I use hoshuma gitti, what sort of particles do I need there? I said it was a double-edged sword because if you do this, you run the risk of another problem I've talked about, and that's the syndrome of I know all these words but separately. When you overanalyze everything, you get the problem where you can't understand things intuitively and holistically, and you really look at things as pieces. So what I try to do is limit my overanalysis. Maybe it's good to overanalyze the word the first time you hear it, but then wean yourself off of that. Don't overanalyze everything you hear because you'll create problems down the line. Language learning is not easy because you can accidentally Pavlov yourself into doing something you didn't want to do. So be aware. But that is all for today. Hopefully I solved the problem that I created for you, and hopefully you put more attention into this part of language learning. It's something we don't talk about a lot, but is actually really important if you ever want to sound natural. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Have you worried about this problem before? What do you do to address it? Did I manufacture this problem? All of the links to my socials will be down in the description if you want to see more from my language journey and if you want to see more of my struggles and successes. I also have a website at Study with Alex if you want to see more about my thoughts and advice and recommendations about language learning. If you've liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe if you want to see more. So thank you for watching today's video. I'll see you for another one very soon. Alright, auf Wiedersehen!